Welcome! Today we're taking a deep dive into TUOPU Group's latest financial report. And what we found is a real puzzle. How can a company see its revenue climb, yet its profits fall so sharply? We're going to unpack the data behind this, look at management's story for a comeback, and explore the really high-stakes debate over the company's future in some cutting-edge fields like robotics and AI. So we've structured our analysis around three core ideas. First, we believe the profit drop you saw in Q3 was a one-off operational hiccup, not a fundamental flaw in the business. Second, there's data suggesting the core business was already bouncing back as early as September. And third, the whole story around this company's future now really hinges on two big, risky bets: humanoid robots and AI liquid cooling. Let's get into it.
All right, first things first. We have to look at the numbers that got everyone talking and really stirred up the market.
This was the number that grabbed all the headlines, a 13.7% drop in net profit compared to the same time last year. You know, a single number like this can create a ton of noise and really set a negative tone right out of the gate. Okay, now this table really tells the story. You see, revenue grew by a healthy 12%. That's good. But the gross margin? It fell by 2.2 percentage points. Now, whenever you see sales going up, but profits going down, that's a classic sign that something's wrong on the cost side. It's not a demand problem, it's an efficiency problem.
And management pointed the finger at one specific thing: their brand new plant in Mexico. It seems the plant just wasn't being used enough, which led to these huge depreciation costs that weren't being covered by revenue. You know, to put it simply, the factory's fixed costs were just crushing the profits because it wasn't busy enough. So, let's switch gears and talk about how management says they're fixing this. We'll look at their reported turnaround and, more interestingly, how this whole episode has actually changed their thinking about their global strategy. This timeline lays it all out pretty clearly. So the problem was an underperforming project from a major client which squeezed the margins. The fix, which they put in place back in August, was to bring in new orders from GM and Ford to get the factory humming again. And they say the proof is in the pudding, pointing to September's numbers as validation.
This quote from the company is absolutely central to their entire story. What they're saying is, hey, that bad Q3 report, that's old news. They're arguing it reflects problems from July and August that were already solved by the time the numbers came out. They're basically asking the market to look past the rearview mirror and focus on the road ahead.
And this is where the strategy gets a fascinating twist. The very thing that caused the profit problem, these super expensive overseas plants, is now being pitched as a huge advantage, a tariff moat, if you will. With all these new tariffs on Chinese EVs in the US and Europe, suddenly having factories in Mexico and Poland isn't a liability. It's a lifeline. It lets your clients get around those steep costs. So what looked like a financial risk is now being spun as a strategic shield.
Okay, so beyond just fixing the core business, the conversation is now shifting to two really exciting and very different new ventures. These are being positioned as the company's next big growth engines.
You know, the best way to think about these new businesses is to see them as call options. It's a useful financial analogy. It perfectly captures what they are: incredibly high risk, super uncertain, but with the potential for massive, game-changing returns if these tech trends really take off. And this table gives you a great side-by-side comparison. On one hand, you have humanoid robotics. We're talking customers like Tesla. This is the big, long-term moonshot, but the timeline is a huge question mark. We're even hearing about client delays. On the other hand, there's AI liquid cooling for giants like Huawei and NVIDIA. This is a smaller, more concrete project that's expected to start contributing much sooner, in early 2026. But of course, a good analysis has to look at the other side of the coin. So let's dig into the major risks and the points where the market just can't seem to agree. That problem back in Q3, it was a direct symptom of this right here: client concentration. In 2024, more than 2/3 of their revenue came from just their top 5 clients. When you're that dependent on a handful of customers, your performance is going to be incredibly sensitive to their project schedules and their demand. It's a major structural risk. And here's the heart of the debate, especially around robotics: timing. The bulls believe the company can become a go-to supplier in this new industry. But the bears are pumping the brakes, pointing out that a key client has apparently postponed their project, which makes the whole production timeline, well, quite uncertain, to put it mildly. So to be fair, let's lay out the full counter-argument. The bear case says that the Q3 margin problem wasn't a blip,
It's the new reality. They argue the September recovery was just a dead cat bounce, and that this whole robotic story is a fancy smokescreen to hide the fact that the core business is actually struggling. And all of this brings us to the really big strategic question, doesn't it? The TUPU story is a fantastic case study in a classic dilemma. How do you balance the reliable, steady income from your main business with these massive, uncertain bets on the future? Finding that right balance? That's what everyone will be watching next.